What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about sprint to fire times and how it interacts with ADS time, how it works in general, how it interacts with sliding, how it interacts with jumping, as well as a combination of all these different things. This one took me a lot of time, so if you guys enjoy the video, please drop a sub, a like, and a comment. Usually about 30 to 40% of the people watching my videos aren't subscribed, so if you want to help us out and it doesn't cost you anything, just drop a sub and we would appreciate that. But let's jump into it and we'll talk about sprint to fire times and how it interacts with everything. So before we get into the spreadsheets that I know you guys love so much, we're going to go through exactly how I tested each one of these things and show you examples so you know what they are. So we're going to start with ADS time. So this is one of the things I need as a baseline to measure. I used multiple different guns with different loadouts to try to understand exactly how all this stuff interacts, because sometimes you have really fast ADS time and slow sprint to fire time. Sometimes you have really fast sprint to fire time, but really slow ADS time. So I did a bunch of different combinations with different guns and builds and things to try to make this come out the most clear as possible. We're just going to go through examples of one of them just so you guys can see how I was testing this. So for ADS time, basically you find the first frame the gun moves, which is right here, and then you just count frames until the FOV zooming in animation is done. In this case, I have that change zoom button that pops up right when I know the animation's done, so that makes it really easy when you're testing something like a sniper. So yeah, 27 frames there to get the ADS time for this bullfrog build. Next up is the sprint to ADS time. This is something I measured today. So basically I would sprint and then find the first frame where the hip fire dots show up. So right there you can see the hip fire, the 4 hip fire dots show up in this frame right here, and then we measure the time to ADS. And you can see again, there's going to be plus or minus 1 frame generally on these. So this is 28 frames this time. So for this bullfrog build, the sprint to ADS time is the same as the ADS time. Another thing I tested was Tac Sprint to ADS. So this is Tac Sprint, just Tac Sprint, use the same logic here. So the first frame where the hip fire dots show up to fully being zoomed in. Again, 27 frames, same there again. Next up is sprint to hip fire. So this is what's measured on the website. When I have a sprint to fire time on the website, this is what you see. So basically the same logic here. You go for the first frame, you look for the first frame, the hip fire dots show up, and that would be right there. And then you just count the frames until the first bullet is fired. In this bullfrog's case, this was my fast sprint to fire build. So it was only 7 frames from sprint to fire. So that's really quick there. Next thing I tested was tactical sprint to fire. Same exact thing here, just with tactical sprint. So you just go to the first frame, and then it was 10 frames till the first bullet was fired right there. You can see the ammo count go down as well as the hip fire dots spread. Sprint to ADS plus firing simultaneously. So this was trying to see how ADS and firing interact with your sprint to fire time. So this has 2 measurements in it. So we do the same thing where we go to the first dot, or the first frame where the hip fire dots appear, which is right here. And then this is me holding down ADS and fire at the same time. So you'll see here, the gun fires at 6 frames. So same as your sprint to fire time. And then it still hasn't really started the ADS yet. And then you can see here now it starts the ADS and it brings it in, and my ADS was 28. So this is how I thought it worked. But we'll go through all the numbers in terms of different guns and builds and things. But yeah, it was still 27 frames, 28 frames to ADS, and 7 frames to fire. You can fire before the ADS animation finishes, with sprint to fire time being lower. Next up, same exact thing, but with Tac Sprint. So Tac Sprint, the first frame where you see the hip fire dots appears right here. And then I fire my first bullet at 10 frames, 11 frames. So the same again as Tac Sprint. And then ADS again is also 27 frames. And so there's no difference there. Exactly how we thought it worked. Next up was sprint to slide plus fire. So this is sprinting and then sliding and firing at the exact same time. So with this bullfrog build right here is the first frame. We use the same logic again. First frame, I start sliding right here. And then you just count frames until the first bullet is fired. So you can see the first bullet was fired at 20 frames right there. I have all of this in a spreadsheet that we're going to go to in a second. Next up, the same thing, just with Tac Sprint. So again, we're just Tac Sprinting to a slide and then firing. And again, it was exactly 20 frames, 19 frames in this case, now 20 frames. Then we had sprint to slide plus fire plus ADS. This was me including everything all in one because I wanted to see exactly how this stuff stacked and how it worked. So sprinting, I start sliding right here. The hip fire dot shows up, first frame. So 20 frames to get the first bullet to fire. And then it was 47 frames to get your ADS. So you'll notice that that's different. We'll talk about all the numbers and what this all means once we get into the spreadsheet. I'm just trying to show you how I did these things, but yeah, spoiler, the slide animation is 20 frames and you can't get below that with your firing, and it adds 20 frames to your ADS as well because you can't ADS during that sliding animation. Next up is Tac Sprint. Same thing, Slide+Fire+ADS all at the same time. You'll see the same thing here. First bullet's fired at frame 20. ADS starts, ADS finishes at 47, 48, so it's 20 frames extra. Sprint to Slide+ADS. This was just seeing if this made any difference, removing that the firing from it. But it does not, so you're fully ADS'd at 47 frames again, just like you would expect. Tac Sprint to Slide. This was same again. You get 47 frames, 48 frames, 47 frames. And then I wanted to test jumping as well because, again, I pretty much knew how all this worked, but I wanted to confirm it. So sprinting to jump plus fire simultaneously. So I'm shooting and jumping at the exact same time, starting at the same frame again. So you see the first bullet's fired at frame 7, which is your sprint to fire time. So that makes sense. Jumping has no effect on sprint to fire. They're completely independent things. So as soon as you jump, you're no longer sprinting, which means that timer for sprint to fire starts. Then I did the same thing with Tac Sprint here. So Tac Sprint to jump simultaneously. First bullet is fired in frame 10, exactly like your Tac Sprint should be. So yeah, jumping just cancels your sprint, and that makes sense. It just starts the sprint to fire timer right then. All right, I'm not going to go through every single one of these things that I tested just for the interest of time. What I'm going to do is you guys can pause this if you want to look at it, and then I'm going to talk about the results of all this testing instead. So I tested 4 different guns technically, 6 different guns if you count different builds. So I tested an M4, one with slow ADS, so that was monolithic grenadier, variable zoom sniper, 60 round mag, and then an M4 with fast ADS, which was just the ADS stock commando barrel. I tested those both with and without 5 milliwatt laser sight because I wanted to see how better sprint to fire times would affect all these measurements on both a fast ADS build and a slow ADS build. So this is M4 number 1 right here. All the measurements I took for every different kind of thing. Those are the tests I just ran through in the intro. Time to ADS, time to fire are the measurements in terms of frames. Same for these columns. And then the Bullfrog was... The idea behind the Bullfrog was I wanted really slow ADS, but really fast sprint to fire time to see how that affected stuff. So I've got the Raider stock, just so I have really good sprint to fire times. Suppressor helps sprint to fire times even more. SUSAT multi-zoom because that hurts your ADS times a ton. 85 round fast mag for the same reason. And 5 milliwatt laser sight for the same reason. Keep in mind the 5 milliwatt laser sight on the Bullfrog doesn't actually help your sprint to fire times. It just helps hip fire and hurts your ADS times. So yeah, this is the M4 slow ADS build with all the measurements. This is the M4 with fast ADS times with all the measurements. Again, just pause here if you want. If you wanted to look through these and try to understand them. And then the Bullfrog with that really fast sprint to fire time but slow ADS. These are the measurements I got here. And then to confirm something, I did Uzi measurements with a really fast ADS Uzi and measured the ADS time, sprint to ADS time, and Tac Sprint to ADS time. And then I did a really fast M4, fastest ADS M4 you can build, and did the same thing where I did time to ADS, sprint to ADS, and Tac Sprint to ADS. So what were the results of all this? So these are the things that I wrote down that I found out about this and helped me understand it. So the first thing, if you have a gun with super fast ADS time and bad sprint to fire time, for example, this super fast M4 that I built had nothing that helped with its sprint to fire times, but had tons of attachments to help with ADS time. It can actually make it so coming out of sprint, your ADS animation takes longer. So my base ADS with this build was 11 frames. It took an extra 5 frames to ADS out of sprint. And then it took an extra 11 frames, so it doubled my ADS time coming out of Tac Sprint. But that's a very, very specific case. If you have a normal gun that has reasonable ADS time and you don't mess with the sprint to fire times at all, your ADS time going into your sprint or coming out of your sprint is exactly the same as your regular ADS time. Same with your ADS coming out of a Tac Sprint will be exactly the same as your regular ADS time. So you can see with the Uzi here, the Uzi has really fast ADS times, but it also has really good sprint to fire times. So that sprint to fire animation isn't affected by anything. It's just, it already has really good sprint to fire times. So you can see these were all about the same. Tac Sprint was actually held back a little bit in terms of how fast you could ADS out of it, but 2 frames is basically the same, and Sprint was the same. And you can look up here, I will cover this real fast. The slow ADS M4 that I built, both with and without the 5 milliwatt, the ADS times coming out of Sprint and coming out of Tac Sprint were identical to the default ADS time. So in the vast majority of cases, your ADS time is going to be the same when you're just standing there, when you're coming out of Sprint, and when you're coming out of Tac Sprint. It's not affected by those in general. There are some edge cases like the super fast ADS build that I'm talking about. But besides that, your regular ADS time is going to be exactly the same coming out of Sprint and coming out of Tac Sprint. So that's something I think a lot of people were confused on. A lot of people thought if you had, a lot of people thought you could add the ADS time to the sprint to fire time. I got asked a lot why I don't put an option on the website to add ADS and add sprint to fire to the TTK, because people thought that's how it worked. Some people thought that. I never thought that was the case, but this confirms it for me. There are some rare cases where that is true. But in general, that's not how it works. It's either you're going to add your ADS time if you want to ADS, or you're going to add sprint to fire if you're going to hip fire. So that's basically what it comes down to there. Something else that I discovered while looking at this, since I did all kinds of slide testing, the slide animation is 333 milliseconds or 20 frames at 60 FPS. You can never fire faster than that when you slide. Even if your sprint to fire time is way lower than 333 milliseconds and your tac sprint to fire time is way lower than 333 milliseconds, you're going to fire exactly when that animation ends, which is 333 milliseconds. So that is just something to note there, that sliding will make it so you can't fire until that slide animation is up. The slide animation time is added to your ADS time always, no matter what your ADS time is. So if you look at these again, just briefly, you'll see my default ADS for the slow M4 was 38 frames. And then in every single case, it took an extra 20 frames to ADS when I came out of a slide. So if I slid and tried to ADS at any point, it always took exactly 20 frames extra to ADS than it did just default ADS. And that was true for the fast ADS build as well. My default ADS for my fast M4 was 12 frames. And every single one of the ADSs out of a slide took an extra 20 frames. Came out true for the Bullfrog as well, exactly 20 frames extra. Open bolt delay, this is something I didn't test, but I know this is true just because I've tested open bolt delay I've tested sprint to fire times on open bolt delay guns in the past. Open bolt delay just stacks on top of sprint to fire time. So if you have a 100 millisecond internal sprint to fire time clock that runs as soon as you press the trigger when you're sprinting, and the gun has a 50 millisecond open bolt delay, it's just simply 150 milliseconds before you can fire coming out of a sprint. So you can kind of think of it like an extra penalty to your sprint to fire when you have an open bolt delay. Another question I get asked a lot is, can you fire as soon as the sprint to fire timer is up? So when you're sprinting, if your sprint to fire time is much lower than your ADS time, so say you have a slow ADS Bullfrog, like a 300 milliseconds ADS Bullfrog, but your sprint to fire time is only 100 milliseconds. If you start firing as you're starting the ADS animation, yes, you can fire exactly 100 milliseconds into that ADS animation that is 300 milliseconds long. So you'll start firing before you fully ADS. And that's just simply exactly what sprint to fire time means. It's just a timer from the second you pull the trigger until a bullet will come out of the gun. So it's not like I said, it's not like they add together or anything. They're completely separate most of the time. The only time they're not completely separate is this one really rare edge case where you have a crazy fast ADS gun with much slower sprint to fire times that can then slow you down. All right, before I close this video out, I want to talk about this point number 1 again. I kind of made it confusing the way I wrote it. Basically, it's simple. If your ADS is faster than your sprint to fire time, so in this case, I built an M4 with like 150 milliseconds of ADS. If your ADS is faster than sprint to fire, so the sprint to fire on this was default, so it was around that 270 milliseconds. As soon as that happens, your ADS time just becomes your sprint to fire time. So if you build a gun with faster ADS times than sprint to fire, your ADS time will end up matching exactly what the sprint to fire time number is there. So that's just it's a pretty rare situation to actually have that happen, but it is possible with ARs and LMGs. But it is just a rare thing to happen. So I just added it to this faster M4 table. This is the fast ADS M4. You can see my normal sprint to fire time was 16 frames. My tac sprint to fire time was 22 frames. Because my ADS time was below that in this rare case, my sprint to ADS time and my tac sprint to ADS time just became the same thing as my sprint to fire and my tac sprint to fire. So that's just a mechanic that's in the game. But it's pretty rare that your ADS time is going to be below your sprint to fire time. Not impossible, obviously, but it is pretty rare. All right, guys, that was a lot of talking, a lot of different things to go over there. I hope it made sense to you. I tried to make as much sense as possible. Even as someone who spends literally my life measuring stuff in Call of Duty, I didn't know exactly how all this stuff worked and how it stacked. I've been putting this video off because it was just kind of a pain in the butt. It took a lot of time to get all this stuff measured. But we got it done, and I have a better understanding than I did before. I learned a couple things, like the slide stuff I learned about. I also learned about when your ADS time is faster than your sprint to fire time, how that affects your sprint to ADS times. Overall, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys in the next one. I don't know when that'll be. Like I said, I'm going to be programming a lot, so I don't know if I'm going to get a video out every day for the next week or so, just because I'm trying to finish up all the programming stuff for the website. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one, whenever that is. Have a great rest of your day.